All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Frontier Michigan. We're doing another Tech Talk video. And today we are covering something that is often overlooked in truck comparisons or vehicle comparisons. It sometimes gets brought up, but more often or not, uh, it's not really talked about. So, what am I talking about? The crawl ratio. And what is the crawl ratio? The crawl ratio is the amount of gear reduction possible. It's like the most amount of gear reduction that's possible in your drive line, and it gives you the highest torque multiplication allowed by your drive line. And what that does is allows you to have more precise throttle control. It allows you to be able to climb over obstacles, or in some cases, more torque applied to the wheels to pull something. So there's that. So how do we calculate a crawl ratio? In order to calculate a crawl ratio, it is the lowest gear ratio in the transmission, so first gear, times the low range ratio, or the lowest range in the transfer case, which if you have a traditional transfer case, it's going to be your low range, times your axle ratio. And that final number you get is your crawl ratio. So, for example, I'm going to use the Tacoma Trail Hunter. And the Trail Hunter with the automatic, which since that is the hybrid, I believe that is only the automatic, which has a first gear ratio of 4.41 to 1, a transfer case ratio of 2.57 to 1, and an axle ratio of 3.58 to 1. So what you do is you take that 4.41 multiplied by 2.57 multiplied by 3.58, and it gives you a final number of 40.57 to 1. So the Tacoma Trail Hunter has a crawl ratio of 40.57 to 1. And while that might sound impressive to some people that may not know, that's actually not a particularly great crawl ratio for the segment. In fact, comparatively speaking, all automatic 4th gen Tacomas have that crawl ratio. So your 4x4 SR5, your TRD Off-Road, your TRD Pro, your TRD, your Tacoma Trail Hunter, they all have the same transmission if it's an automatic, or if it's the hybrid. They have the same transfer case, the same axle ratio across the board. So if it's an automatic, every automatic 4th gen Tacoma will have a 40.57 to 1 crawl ratio. The only exception to that is the manual version, which has more aggressive gearing, which I will put up and list all of the crawl ratios for the mid-size segment. I did a very deep dive on this, and I do mean extensive, because some of the information here, like for the Colorado and Canyons, for example, it's not explicitly listed at what the crawl ratio is, so I had to do my due diligence and research it. So, with a 40.57 to 1 crawl ratio, the manuals, the manual Tacomas have a 58.72 to 1 crawl ratio. which is actually the third best crawl ratio in the segment. So you go from second worst crawl ratio with the Tacoma to third best. Now, where does the Frontier sit as far as its crawl ratio? The Frontier has a first gear ratio of 5.42 to 1, a transfer case low range ratio of 2.71 to 1, which is fairly standard, and it has a 369 axle ratio. So you take 5.42 multiplied by 2.71 multiplied by 3.69, which gives you a crawl ratio on the Nissan Frontier of 54.19 to 1. That crawl ratio is the fourth best crawl ratio in this segment. Okay, fourth best. However, I have to point out, for standard drivelines, okay, since the Frontier only gets one engine, one transmission type, one transfer case, and one axle ratio across all Frontiers, base model S to a Pro 4X, every Frontier that is four-wheel drive will have a 54.19 to 1 crawl. Every one of them. Now, who has the best crawl ratio? That would be the Jeep Gladiator if you get the Rubicon. Rubicon is not standard. So, in the Rubicon, which is the most expensive version of the Gladiator, you get a 77.24 to 1 crawl ratio. The most expensive Ranger Raptor, the most expensive Ranger, the Raptor variant, has a 67.88 to 1. So, you have to get the most expensive Gladiator or the most expensive Ranger to get the class topping crawl ratios. Or get a manual Tacoma to beat the Frontier. So that's it. The three trucks that have a better crawl ratio than the Frontier is the Gladiator Rubicon, the Ranger Raptor, or a manual Tacoma. And how many manual Tacomas are there that's being sold? Majority are automatics. How many Ranger Raptors do you see out there? Not a whole lot, considering that the Ranger itself really isn't selling particularly great. So there's not a lot of Ranger Raptors. How many Gladiator Rubicons do you see? In my area, I've only seen like a handful. Most of them are like a Willys or an Overland, which does not get the Rubicon's gear reduction of 4. Most standard transfer cases is about 2.5, 2.7 to 1. The Rubicon gets a 4.0 to 1 gear reduction. But a Rubicon is also $64,000. Just saying. So let's go down the list. These are the trucks that the Frontier's crawl ratio beats. Gladiator. Okay. Non-Rubicon with the 410 axle ratio is a 52.33 to 1. Below that, and this crawl ratio matches the non-Ranger Raptor Rangers. So, Gladiator and Ranger, but we're talking about the 373 non-Rubicon Gladiator and the normal non-Raptor Ranger, both have a 47.61 to 1 crawl ratio. Okay. Going below that now. So, below the range toppers, below the stick shift Tacoma, below the Frontier, below your non Rubicon Gladiators, and below the Ranger, you have the Colorado and Canyon Twins. Now, unfortunately for them, irregardless of what the driveline configuration is, they have the same 8-speed, and they only come in automatic, same 8-speed auto, the same axle ratio, and same transfer case, low range. So that includes ZR2 Bison, or whatever. Every Colorado, every Canyon. 42.41 to 1 crawl ratio. Without exception, all of them. Now, below that, you have every other Tacoma that is an automatic with a 40.57 to 1. So that means if you want to get the 58 to 1 crawl ratio, you have to settle for a stick shift, and you can't get the hybrid, and that 2.4 turbo is slightly detuned for the manual so that you don't break the transmission. So you can get a really amazing crawl ratio, but you sacrifice no hybrid option and less power. Good job, Toyota. But the bottom of the segment, the very, very bottom of the segment of crawl ratios, is the Honda Ridgeline. And the only reason that the Honda Ridgeline actually is so terrible is because it has no low range. So I'm counting it in this comparison because, unfortunately, the Ridgeline is classified as a mid-size truck. So we're including it. Now, the Honda Ridgeline, it has a first gear ratio of 4.71 to 1. It's pretty common on these 8 speeds and 8-speed trans and 9-speed and 10-speed trans. So the 8 and 10 speeds, pretty common to have that 4.71 first gear. So there's no low range. The axle ratio in the Ridgeline is actually the best in class at 4.33 to 1. So you get amazing axle ratio, but no low range to take advantage of it. Good job, Honda. You could have at least, figured out a way to put a low range in the Ridgeline without, destroying the characteristics of the Ridgeline, but I don't know, I'm not a Honda engineer. So, what did we learn from this little talk here that nobody else seems to talk about? And I've rarely seen any videos on YouTube make mention of crawl ratio. So I'm throwing this one out there. I'm throwing all the competitors out there in the mid-size truck segment. The Frontier, okay? Frontier has the highest standard crawl ratio at 54.19 to 1. And I say that even though there is a manual Tacomas out there, is the manual Tacoma is not the standard. You have to option the manual. Out of the box, Tacomas are automatic. And the Gladiator Rubicon is not an out of the box. That's range topping model, Ranger Raptors, range topping model. And those are upper 50s, starting, upper 50s, low 60s to get into one of those. So this is further proving my point that the Frontier is, in my mind, the best value for your money. No, it's not the fanciest truck, but you get a lot there for what you do spend. And in this case, you get the best standard, best standard crawl ratio. If you like this video and you want to see more of it underneath the light here in the engine bay. Let me know down below. Let's talk about it. Your thoughts, opinions, whatever. Just keep it respectful, and we can have a civil discussion about it. Thanks for watching. I'm Jeff, and I'll see you guys later. I'm going to get out of here and plan my day for tomorrow. So, catch you guys later.